Hello and welcome everyone to today's webcast, Resilience, the Key to Success in the Face of Adversity. My name is Tanya Trivoni, Senior Practice Leader here at Canadian Management Center. I'm really excited to introduce the speaker for today's session, Marilyn Deborah. Marilyn is one of our very experienced facilitators here at the Canadian Management Center. She holds her CTP designation from the Canadian Society of Training and Development. In addition to her facilitation, she brings over 25 years of management experience. Marilyn has worked in organizations big and small, public, private, non-for-profit. She brings a plethora of expertise to the conversation. And one of the things that had us invite Marilyn to this conversation specifically is she's been working recently with a lot of clients, helping them find effective ways to navigate this environment we're in of ambiguity, of constant change, of considerable stress. So the topic of resilience has really been a key focus for her. So Marilyn, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Tanya. It's nice to be here.
So before I hand things over to Marilyn, just a couple of quick things that I wanted to mention. The first is to those of you who are new to the Canadian Management Center, a warm welcome. We are a national organization dedicated to preparing the next generation of leaders to thrive in tomorrow's marketplace. And we offer webcasts like this based on topics that we hear from you, requests that we get from folks like yourself. So please, at the end of this session, we love your feedback. Take a moment to comment in the comment chat panel to share with us any topics you'd like us to address in future sessions. The last thing I wanted to mention, and it's a popular question, is this session being recorded? And the answer to that question is absolutely yes. So you will receive via email a copy of this recording, which obviously will have the visuals as well. Now, to get started, we actually want to kick things off with a poll question. So Marilyn, I think that you actually have the controls. If you could forward that, and if we could have May launch the poll question right now, we would love to see where you are at. So which of the following questions resonate the most with you right now? So would you say that, when you're waking up, you're feeling energized and positive about the day? Would you say that's true some days, but there are a few struggly days? Are there more struggly days than not? Or are you in a state of pretty much complete overwhelm at this moment? We're going to give you a few seconds to pick the option that indicates where you're at. At any time, feel free to communicate with us in the chat panel. Your comments are visible to us as panelists. And also you can begin to enter any questions you have in the Q&A panel for us today. So if we could end the poll, May, and take a look at the results. So it looks like there are a few of you out there, and I'm really, really happy to see this, that you are feeling positive most days overall, but there are quite a few of us, a disproportionate majority, are struggling at least on some days. So for all of you, first of all, I want to thank you for participating in that and sharing authentically with us. I'd also like to extend the invitation for you, to the extent possible, minimize the distractions you've got going on right now and really be with us for this time. Give yourself the gift of time so that you can really walk away with something of benefit. And in order to know what to expect, I'm going to hand things over to Marilyn, and she's going to share the goal for today's session. Marilyn, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tanya. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. So our goal for today is to offer you strategies and tools to achieve... I'm having technical difficulties. For achieving resilience and optimism in challenging circumstances. To get started, I'm going to share you one story with two different outcomes. So meet Leo and Anna. Leo and Anna are colleagues in an advertising agency. They've worked together long and hard and tirelessly with a lot of energy and enthusiasm on the Jumpstart account. Unfortunately, today they found out that their agency had lost the account. Leo's reaction was to take it highly personally. He was thinking back on all the times he had asked for support from management and they had been ignored, and he was realizing that that was a pattern of the way things were handled there. He was thinking back of the amount of times he had tried different things and they didn't work, the amount of accounts he had been on that didn't succeed, and he had had enough. So he called a colleague of his at a different agency to find out if there were any openings there. Anna, on the other hand, same situation. She took a look at all the work they had done and wanted to make sure that that was documented, because even though they lost the account, there was a lot of good work that was done. So as opposed to just trashing all of it, let's keep it and we can use it on another project so we don't have to recreate the wheel. Then she took a look at the areas where the holes were that might have contributed to that loss of the account and tried to find out what they could have done differently. She called a colleague at a different advertising agency to find out if they had experienced a similar outcome and if they had any other solutions. So their stories are not unique. I'm sure all of us have been either of them at any time. But I'm curious, write in the chat below, which of these two can you relate better to? Are you on Team Leo or are you on Team Anna? Write it in the chat.
I would love to say that I'm on Team Anna, Marilyn, but I gotta admit that these days I've been a little bit more of a Leo. And okay, we're getting responses fast and furious.
And it's looking pretty even there, actually.
I know, it's a bit of a competition. And the folks who are saying Anna are all saying Team Anna. So I love the the competitive spirit. But you're right, it's a bit of a split. Sometimes more Leo, sometimes more Anna. Some are very clear. So it looks like we can relate to both of them. I'm guessing it might depend on the situation.
And I would agree with that, because I can think, even for me, I can think of times where I've been both. Okay, that's great. So the journey that we're going to take today is going to answer these three questions. And the questions we're going to answer are, number one, what is resilience? Number two is, why is building resilience essential to our well-being? And number three is still coming. And number three is, how do you overcome the obstacles to resistance and optimism? Okay, so in order to answer that question, it's important to start with definitions. So we're going to start with the definition of resilience. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. What that means is it's our ability to bounce back from adversity. It's how quickly we're able to pick ourselves up and move forward. When we look at that, you can think of a family where they have experienced a very difficult circumstance, and the children of the family, one grows up and becomes a huge success, and the other one does not. So what is it that enables one person to move beyond and others of us to stay where we are or to be held back? Okay. A big part of resilience is being aware of what you're thinking about at that time and being able to identify those emotions so that they don't cloud our judgment. A tool I'm going to share with you is one that I call my 4-second rule, which allows us to move forward in resilience. 4-second rule is based on the biathletes in the Winter Olympics. They're the athletes who cross-country ski for 26 kilometers at warp speed, drop down onto their stomachs, raise themselves up on their elbows. They shoot at a target about this big, 50 feet away from them. And I don't know about any of you, but if any of you have ever cross-country skied, run, or gone up a flight of stairs recently, you would know what that adrenaline rush feels like. When we are in that moment where we are not objective, we have simulated an adrenaline rush where our minds are clouded. What they do is they breathe for 4 seconds. What I do in my 4-second rule is, number one is I identify. So when our minds are clouded and we are not objective, our bodies are usually giving us a clue that we're in that state. For me, that's the eye twitch. So I don't know about you. Some of you may have the itchy palm, or you may feel your faces get flushed, or your ears are moving, or you feel very, very sweaty. Our bodies are telling us what our mind is not able to see. So as soon as I notice that eye twitch, I immediately say, stop. And the funny part is your mind's actually listened to that. So whatever that spin was, it stops. Then I say, okay, Marilyn, What are you feeling at this moment? And generally when I'm in that state, it's not a positive emotion. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, whatever it is. So I identify it, and then I visualize myself taking that emotion and putting it behind me. And I say, okay, I know what you are, and we can deal with that later. Because right now, while we are not aware of what we're feeling, it's taking up a lot of real estate in our minds. Now I'm moving it aside. I'll come back to that later. And then I ask myself two questions. One of them is what's happening now, or what's wrong? And the second question is, what do I want to do about it? And those are steps to move forward. So that's my 4-second rule. And 4 seconds is arbitrary. It could take 3 and it could take 10, but it's about taking the time to stop the movement in your head and to redirect it. So that's resilience. Optimism, on the other hand, is hopefulness and confidence about the future. What that means is that is the belief that things will get better. Okay, so resilience is the ability to pick yourself up and move forward, and optimism is the hopefulness, is the belief that things will get better. Positivity is different than optimism. Positivity is finding the good in a bad situation or in any situation. And optimism is believing that it'll be better. So just because you're optimistic doesn't mean you're necessarily positive. But what it does mean is that you do have a belief that things will get better. Okay. So I'm just curious, which one, anyway, they tie together. They tie together because you need both in order to be resilient. So they help us to, yes.
Marilyn, sorry, there's just a question in the chat panel. In terms of those steps you just talked about, are you able to repeat what those are?
Yes. Number one is identify that you have those thoughts. So whatever the physical reaction is, identify what it is, how I am feeling, whatever. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, I'm confused. And then I visualize myself putting it aside because now I've identified it. It no longer is taking up the space. And then I ask two questions: what's going on, or how, or what's wrong? And then the second one is, what do I want to do about it? I've made a choice. When I'm in that spin, I don't feel I have a choice. But once I take the thing that's causing the spin out of the way, it opens up my mind to the possibilities.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so now I'm curious about you. I'd like you to be the case study for yourself today. So we're not going to give you a case study. You're going to be your case study. I'd like you to think back on a time, any time in your life when you feel that resilience and optimism might have escaped you. Okay. Take a couple of minutes and write down some key notes that tells you that. So, because you're going to be coming back to that. And as we go through the strategies and the steps, you can apply them to your case so that you can learn how to be more resilient and optimistic in future cases. So take a couple of minutes and make some notes about a situation where you might have felt that resilience and optimism might have escaped you.
And I'm guessing right now, Marilyn, that folks have a few examples to choose from. And as we're giving them a few moments, I'm happy to share. As we were preparing for this conversation today, I was thinking about my own situation. And so I'm homeschooling a daughter who's 9 years old. And just last week, as I'm preparing for a conversation on resilience, do I not find myself in pretty much a complete meltdown? I was running late for a meeting, trying to get my daughter onto a Zoom call. The technology is not working. She's overtired. She goes into a meltdown. I'll skip all the details, but the punchline is I remember standing there going, I can't do this. Like, I cannot keep doing this. I was not skilled for this. I was not meant to be teaching and working full time, and there's no end in sight. So it was certainly a low moment in terms of my own resilience. And I'm guessing there's a ton of examples like that, and even far more serious than that one.
Absolutely. And every single one of us is totally okay to feel however you do, because that's absolutely normal.
And I'm seeing, thank you to those commenting in the chat panel, that it seems to be a lot of people who can relate to that scenario right now.
Absolutely. So the secret to be resilient can be summed up in one word, and that's mindset. That's the way we think about it. Okay. And the word mindset, or having a resilient mindset, is made up of 3 different elements. One is having a growth mindset. The second is having positive self-talk. And the third is cognitive restructuring, which is another way of saying reframing the situation from one way of looking at it to another. Okay. And the word mindset was coined by Stanford University psychologist Carol Dweck. Her research was done on achievement, and she was curious to know what were the factors that contributed to some people being more successful than others. And what she found was it all came down to their thinking, and so she coined the term mindset. And she identified two very specific mindsets. One was a fixed mindset, and the other was a growth mindset. In the fixed mindset, people who have a fixed mindset believe that you're born with the skills that will allow you to be successful. You're born with it. These individuals believe that leaders are born, they're not made. Okay. And there are times when all of us have a fixed mindset. Okay. So, and that's all fine and natural. But this one tends to be a more limiting mindset, is that there isn't the belief that I need to put any effort into anything, because if I don't have that skill, it's not going to make a difference anyway. Okay. On the other hand, the growth mindset takes a look at the fact that even though I may not be born with that characteristic or that skill, it's something that I can actually learn through hard work and persistence, and that I will learn and grow. I'll be a lifelong learner. I'll develop these intelligence and this talent through that journey. Okay. And while both mindsets are part of who we are, and we have both, it's the growth mindset that is far more attached to the resilient way of thinking than the fixed mindset is. Okay. And thinking back on COVID and how you've been responding to it, write in the chat, which of these mindsets have you found you've been spending more time in, the fixed mindset or the growth mindset?
And related to that, Marilyn, we have actually a poll question coming up, which is directly related to what you're putting in there. But folks are putting a lot of growth mindset. There is some fixed mindset coming up. Maybe this is a good point. May, if you could launch our poll question, and Marilyn, if we can go to our next slide. And as you can see, the question that's coming up is, would you agree or disagree that during the pandemic, you've learned new skills that have helped you to grow personally or professionally? I definitely would say that there is a lot of growth going on. Now, I want to acknowledge that folks are also saying that they're exhausted from it. But if we could share our poll results now, you can see that an overwhelming majority of 90% of us are saying that we are learning a lot. So a lot of us are learning. Some of us are getting tired from the learning. I also, before I pass things back to Marilyn, just want to acknowledge those of you who are entering questions in the chat panel. I am jotting them down, and we do hope to have some time to do a Q&A. So keep those questions coming. If we can answer them as we go along, we will, but otherwise we will address them towards the end. So back to you, Marilyn.
Thank you. That's great. That makes me very happy. I'm happy and I'm proud of all of you. Well done. Well done. So in order to expand your growth mindset, it's important to be curious, because curiosity opens possibilities. And what's interesting is that most of us, actually not most of us, all of us are born curious. This is what's interesting. We are all born curious. It is through our trying things out and the way that others are responding to us, which goes back to the self-talk, that we become more judgmental. So it's tapping back into that curiosity and the open mindset instead of being judgmental, which is limiting your ability to see things, that will lead you to grow and to learn and to find ways of being more resilient. So curiosity instead of judgment leads to learning and growth. Okay. Which brings us to self-talk. Self-talk is that voice that you hear in your head when those situations are happening. And generally, and there's positive self-talk and negative self-talk. Our negative self-talk tends to be louder for some reason in our head. And some examples of what that self-talk might look like is things we say to ourselves like, this is impossible. Oh my goodness, this is impossible. My technology is a little faulty today. Here we go. I'm stupid. This will never work. I have no idea what I'm doing. This is hopeless. Now, when you think about it, that voice that you're hearing isn't yours. It's somebody else's voice that's coming through in your head. Going back to the earlier example of how we're not curious, is people are giving us those thoughts. So what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to take your thumb and your forefinger and put them together like this. Then take them and put them on your opposite shoulder and quiet that voice by flicking it off. Get rid of it. Goodbye. Okay, so
I
now
might do
that
something a little bit more powerful, but I'm liking this. Maybe just the whole hand, but go ahead.
that's fine if you want to. But now what you've done is you've silenced that voice so you can hear your own. Okay, all of this, it's natural to self-doubt and self-guess because we're actually wired as part of our fight and flight and survival mechanism to immediately go to the negative place. It's about being aware of how long you stay in that place that makes the difference. So what you've done is you've allowed yourself now to hear your own voice. It's okay to self-doubt. Then we move beyond it. Okay. All right. So with our self-talk it's also helpful during these times to talk to a trusted friend who is positive or optimistic that can actually help you to see situations that you may not be aware of, or having mindfulness that allows you to tap into some of the thoughts that are going on to your mind so that you can redirect them in the same way we did with the 4-second rule. Okay.
You know, I really love that. I think that's an important point because when you're in it, it is really, really hard to rise above and take on a new perspective. You know, like to your point, when you have the adrenaline going, you're in that fight or flight, it's hard to just suddenly just go, okay, let me just look at the bright side. So having someone that you can call, it could be a real game changer. As Marilyn is about to go into this next section, we have a tool for you. I'm going to ask May, who's been helping us to put a link. You should see a link now in the chat panel. This will link you to a tool on our website that you can either choose to download now or download later. Marilyn's going to walk through the steps, but in the handout, there are some specific examples. And you can use this either today as we're going through it now, or something as a takeaway so that you can get in the habit of reframing some of these challenging situations. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Tanya. Okay, so now everybody go back to the case study or the situation you identified earlier that you're going to use as your case study for today, and apply the 7 steps as we go along. And you'll see that it's going to help you with your way of thinking. So the first step is identifying a situation that ignites pessimistic or disempowering thoughts. So I'm sure all of us can relate to the situation that you send an angry email to somebody and you regret sending it later. If I was able to identify the situation at that moment and look at it more objectively, I might have made a different choice. So now, going back to the situation you identified earlier, what were you thinking and how were you feeling at the time? So write down a couple of notes to yourself so that you can actually have clarity about that situation. So step 1 is identifying the situation. Just write some keywords of what you were thinking and what you were feeling at the time.
I can definitely say for myself, building on my example, whenever I see my daughter either really struggling or having a meltdown, it's a trigger. It's a trigger for me that automatically goes to a pessimistic place of like, I'm not doing enough. I'm, not being a good mom right now. There's too much going on. So that for me is definitely something for me to consider.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and I appreciate your comments that you're putting in there. That's awesome. It shows me that you have that self-knowledge, and I appreciate that. Excellent. Okay. Step 2 is number 1 is I've identified the situation. The second one is describe your mood. So how did that make you feel then? More importantly, how are you feeling about it now as you're remembering it? Take some notes on that.
And I'm seeing a lot of folks are sharing in the chat panel. They're talking about feeling drained, feeling loss and grief and stress and depression and feeling alone. There's an overwhelming amount of really tough emotions that people are experiencing at the time, right now.
I'd like to share something that my mother taught me a long time ago that you might be able to use for this. We all have self-doubt and we all think that there's more we could do. And there's a lot of guilt that comes through a lot of that as well. And what my mother taught us when we were very young is that as long as you're doing your best, it's the best you could do. So some days that might look like 185%, and tomorrow it might look like 30% in comparison. But that 30% was the best you could do at that time. whereas the 185 was the best you could do at that time. But it's not about comparing yesterday to today. It's about comparing today to today, because while every day is a good day, some days are just better than others. So it's about self-love and forgiving yourself and just accepting the fact that you are doing the best you can. And under COVID conditions, it's pretty trying for all of us. So keep that in mind. So whatever it is you're feeling is natural and true, and that's totally fine. But give yourself a break, that you're doing the best you can, and know that tomorrow is a different day. So whatever I did today is all about today. Tomorrow I start again. We all start fresh every single day. So thank you for all your comments, because I've been watching them a little.
I think what you're saying there, right, Marilyn, it sounds sort of simple and maybe to some people obvious, but it can't be stated enough. I think right now is a time for us, as you say, it really requires compassion for ourselves and for others, but also to take a moment to redefine what success looks like. I have to say this was a pivotal point for me early in this pandemic, and I'm grateful to the team I work with at CMC and my own boss, where we had a conversation around redefining success, because the truth is most of us are not operating at the level that we'd either want to or could before. There were comments in the chat panel, folks doing 3 jobs because of layoffs or whatever. And if we're holding ourselves to the same standard, that's going to just completely continue to drain us. And it will never be good enough. So if anyone out there is listening to this and you, like me, are a self-diagnosed perfectionist, this is a huge opportunity to put that down. We're talking like take a shovel to that one. And it's just not going to work. It's not sustainable. So I love what you're saying and what your mother said. That's a huge message for us to embrace right now.
And you made me think of something else, Tanya. Everybody take your hand and raise it like this. So you're putting your palm out. Now I'd like you to turn it around and put it behind your back and give yourself a good pat on the back. Oh my gosh. We've accomplished unbelievable things under very trying circumstances. So many of us have a to-do list, and we take a look at all the things that are on our to-do list, and we, at the end of the day, go, oh my gosh, I didn't get anything done. Here's an idea. Start a to-done list. Make a list of all the things you actually did do, because you didn't do a lot of nothing when you weren't doing what was on that on your to-do list. You were doing a lot of something. It's all part of that self-love. It's about getting a more realistic view of what's going on. So now we're going to move on to step 3. So step 3 is where the magic happens. Write it down. Oops, I moved ahead to 4. I didn't want to move ahead to 4. I want to still do the magic at step 3. It's moving ahead. Sorry, guys. There we go. My new mouse has a mind of its own, and it's a growth mindset. My mouse has. All right. You're going to write it down. You're going to write down your most intense thoughts and self-talk, anything that you experienced during and after the situation. Why it's important to write it down is it's taking it out of your head and it's putting it in front of you so you can see it. You can't see it in your head because the longer it stays there, it just takes on a whole other life of its own. By taking it out of your head and putting it in front of you, you can see it. And why is that important? It's like if you cut your finger and you don't clean it and put a Band-Aid on it, it could fester, it could get infected. It's kind of what's happening in your head, is that whatever your thoughts are getting infected the longer they're in there. The story just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Take it and put it on paper in front of you, and then you can really see how deep it goes. And then you can deal with it. Because if you can see it, you can deal with it. While it's up here, you can't see it because there's so much other noise. So step 3 is where the magic starts. Write it down.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to add to that, because as someone who resists doing this, people have often told me like, journal your thoughts and stuff. And I own so many pretty journals and pretty pens and all this, but it's really about doing the action. And the reason I say that is right now, addiction is hugely on the rise. So, people, all of us are finding ways to numb ourselves out, whether it's binging Netflix or having that extra glass of wine. And being able to identify what's going on helps us be with the discomfort instead of reaching for something that is unhealthy, that's actually hurting us. So as someone who has resisted actually doing this work, I can say that it helps and it works. But the first step really is doing it. And I'm going to just, sorry, there was some noise in the background. I was about to mute myself, but anyway, passing it back to you.
Thanks. That's a great idea. And if you're not inclined to journal, you all have smartphones with notes on them. And if you have OneNote that you're using for work, set up a OneNote for your thoughts as well. Any way you get them out of your head and in front of you allows you to deal with them. Did my screen just move again?
You know what? I realized that was accidentally me. I'm trying to go through all the chats. So I'm just going to take a quick moment. If folks can, anyone who's asking questions in the chat panel, that's great. But if you can make sure you put them in the Q&A panel, it's just easier for us to make sure we get to them without me magically changing Marilyn's screens. Sorry about that. We're just keeping you on your toes, testing your resilience. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I'm just laughing because my mouse does tend to do that. It'll skip through slides. But I don't want it to go too fast. I actually want us to spend the time on them. Sometimes I say if you can read them, then we're done, but these are important. Whoops. So our next slide is step 4 is find the proof. I call this the how do you know step. This is how do you know that what you think is what's really happening? And because we've convinced ourselves of that, you'll have no trouble finding proof. So take a second on your case study and whatever it is that you believe about it, which I believe is what you believe about it, how do you know? Okay, write it in front of you so you can see it. How do you know? Find the proof. And it's easy to find that proof because you've convinced yourself that that's the situation. Okay.
I'm very talented at proving that I've been a victim of circumstances. I have no issues doing that at all.
Absolutely. And you know what? I do that for positive situations too. Okay, hey, how do I know that that's what it is? You know, it's just all part of being aware of what's going on in that moment. All right, excellent. So the next step, number 5, is a little bit more challenging. Oops, we went on to 6. Number 5 is find the counterproof. I call that, actually, I love this step because it challenges me to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. When you're in the narrower focus or when you're in a negative frame of mind and you're in the fixed mindset, it's harder to see that. So what this is doing is it's encouraging you to take a step back, or as I call it, the aerial view, where you're looking at yourself experiencing it. So you at that moment are not experiencing the situation, you're actually observing yourself experiencing that situation. So you actually have a much broader view of what's going on. So what this allows you to do is take a step back and see all the other things that were going on that you might have missed. Doesn't mean that what you thought was happening didn't happen. It just allows you to see it in a broader context. Okay. So thinking about your situation, put a yes in the chat if you can think of a positive way of looking at it or something that you might have missed that might have changed your view of it. So if you can do that, put a yes. And if you're not able to do that in real time and you need more time to think about it, put a yes in the chat if you're willing to try to take a look at it from that perspective.
And I think that's a good distinction, Marilyn, because I'm sure that, yes, a lot of people are willing to try some huge yeses. Yeah, I think sometimes it can be difficult in the moment you know, we can hold on so tight to knowing that we're right about the situation and how unfair it is. But yes, everyone is coming up saying they're willing to try. Big yeses, big exclamation marks. So
I'm glad. And that's great. I'm going to just share another.
Sorry, that showed up again.
Yes. I'm going to share something that I've been doing for years. I've been doing it since we didn't have smartphones that had timers on them. I've been doing this since the egg timer days. I believe that it is natural for us to go to that negative place. And I also think we have to spend some time there, but we determine how long that time is. So some of us stay in that place for a very long time, and then it becomes a part of our thinking. So what I do is I'll set a timer. Now I'll do it on my smartphone. Prior to that, I would set it on the timer on my car. If I was in the car, if I was going through one of those, I'd set anywhere, because we have timers everywhere. My magic number is 30 minutes. You may find it takes longer, you may find it takes less, but I would set 30 minutes and I would allow myself to live in that thought for 30 minutes. I wouldn't tell myself, oh, Marilyn, get beyond it. I would let myself live in it because I believe, okay, call it a pity party. Thank you for that, Marie. But I allow myself that 30 minutes to go there. And then as soon as the timer goes off, I say, okay, Marilyn, what are you going to do about it? I do that when I'm consulting. I did that with my staff. I would say, okay, we're all unhappy about that. We're going to take 30 minutes and we're going to write, well, in that case, we're going to write down all our thoughts. As soon as that timer goes, we're going to take a look at where we're at, what our thoughts are, and then we're going to take a look at what can we do about it. But that's by setting the timer, that allows you to say, yes, I'm allowed and it's within my rights to feel this way. The important thing is emotions are natural instincts. Our feelings is how they're identified to us in our conscious mind, and actions is how we demonstrate them to other people. So when we go to whatever place we go on an emotional level, it's a natural instinct. So I say, go there, but don't stay there if it's getting in your way. So that's just another little strategy, is to set the timer, and you figure out what that timer is for you. For me, the magic number is 30. But I will tell you, in the last 6 months, I've had to reset it twice.
You're allowed. And if actually you use the term allow, and I think this is a really important point right now. So I think a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, have had some guilt. As I've been struggling with things, I don't think I've always been allowing myself to acknowledge those emotions, because as soon as I say it, I'm like, well, really considering everything, I'm not that bad off. I still have I have a job. I haven't lost any personal family members. And I start to discount it because I almost feel guilty, like venting that, because I know so many people are dealing with stuff that's a lot more serious. But when it's up happening, then you kind of step over those emotions. And then I would imagine that, they don't get processed. So it's okay for us to allow whatever it is that we need to allow. But to the point that was made, actually, someone made the comment in the chat panel, which I love, says resilience requires action. So step 4 was, yes, you can have a pity party and find all the proof for why the situation sucks and vent it and allow it. But then step 5 is where we start to move to action. So Thank you for the allowance.
And if you can't always see it, go back to that trusted friend, because optimism is contagious. Find someone who can help you to see the possibilities in it. And then once you take on that optimistic mindset, other people want to be around you, and they end up developing it as well. So this is a really important step. It's easy to, yeah, sorry, Tanya.
No, I was just going to say, this might be a good point to, I am keeping an eye on the chat panel. We have a lot of Q&A panel. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A. And one person did ask that, she said, I'm a very optimistic person, and therefore I'm the person that most people come to. And she's feeling inundated with people's struggles. And now she's finding her own optimism wearing down. So I don't know if you have anything to being an optimistic person yourself, and I'm sure you're probably a go-to for many people. How do you extend that compassion and listening and yet protect your own resilience in the process?
Okay, so what I've learned to do is when they come to talk to me, I'll ask them before they start. Like they'll start talking, and then I'll ask them, okay, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm curious, is this something that you want me to know, or is there something that you want me to help you with? Because that also lets you know the level of involvement you need to get. Because if you are an optimistic person or a helper person, as I'm sure many of you would identify yourselves as the helper person, people are always coming to us, and we are willing, that's how we're wired, to give that energy. But if you know in advance how much of that energy to give, it allows you to hold some of it for yourself. Because really, many times people just want a sounding board. They're not always looking for the answer, because most of them know the answers themselves. They just want to be able to hear it. So yes, you need to set your boundaries, but you don't want to see, if you're naturally inclined to be a helper person, using even that word boundaries sometimes sounds limiting, and it might sound almost counterintuitive to what you're trying to accomplish. But at times like this, what it is, it's saying that you matter too, and just know what your energy is. So if you are doing that, find something that energizes you. Now, that may not necessarily be talking to someone else. You may not be comfortable doing that, but it may be taking a bath and putting in a special bubble bath. In my case, I have a lot of shoes. So to find something that
our thing. Yes, absolutely. Well, and to that point, I'm seeing, so many comments in the chat panel of people relating to this. People are talking about compassion fatigue. There are people here who are leaders that are saying, my team members are coming to me. I encourage that, but now it's getting exhausting. And I think that distinction also of offering your listening but not necessarily feeling the weight of always having to solve everything. And maybe that's part of it. Those of us who are very compassionate or maybe empathic, we take on those emotions. We feel like we need to have the answers, and that just further exhausts us. So really being able to be clear as to what you can and can't offer and what's reasonable to expect of people right now, I think is tough, because it's to your point, if you're that fixer person or that compassionate person, the term boundaries sounds cold, but it's that whole concept of put your oxygen mask on first will be of no service to anyone else if we ultimately get burnt out. So
Absolutely. And
yeah,
another little thing you can do too is don't feel the need to solve everybody's problems. You can just thank them for sharing that with you. After they're finished, they say, thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate your trust. That way you've given them the ear, but you haven't had to give up any of your energy that you're trying to keep for whatever you need it for. And that doesn't make you cold and unfeeling. They still get a thank you. They still got heard, and they still had their moment with you. What someone once pointed out to me, which I found really unbelievably flattering, is that we imagine you, Marilyn, sitting on our shoulders in those moments. And they came up with an acronym. There's two versions of it. One of them is WWMS, and the other one is WWMD. What would Marilyn say, and what would Marilyn do? And I thought that was like so interesting, is that they, and I'm not there, but what they had found is they had a way of channeling whatever it was that they had got from me, that they were able to find that in those moments when they didn't necessarily have access to me. So
that's really good. And I would also suggest for those people who are, because there's a lot of comments coming from managers and leaders who are just feeling the need, employees are expecting immediate answers. There may be opportunities, if it makes sense, depending on the nature of people's challenges, just practically having people have buddy supports among employees, or even booking meetings that are strategic problem solving. If it is things that people can look to a colleague to help, if it's like I'm homeschooling and I can't do certain pieces of my job. So who maybe, so helping employees help themselves with other employees, because you can only do so much as a leader. So we got to think differently. We're expecting a lot from leaders. So obviously we need to show up as leaders, but we also have to help people helping themselves.
you reminded me of another thought. Many times we are the ones who actually create that need by the questions that we ask them. When we ask somebody how you feel or what you think about a situation, we're keeping them in that moment. If we could think of a more strategic question, and it doesn't mean you don't care about those things, but when I ask you what you think and how you feel, they go to that negative place because they're already there, as
Right.
opposed to saying to them, thank you for sharing that with me. What do you think is the best way to do this? Or how would you like to see that? What that does is it actually encourages them to think of solutions as opposed to you doing it. So for those of us, and it's many of us, we always ask those, how do you feel? Or why do you think that? So we're keeping them in that place.
Yeah.
Reframe the question, and then you'll find that they'll come to you, but you'll be teaching them how to move forward so that you don't have to wear so much of that, because if you are a helper person, you do wear a lot of their emotion.
And I like asking, what's one baby step? I mean, baby step, those terms may not resonate for everyone, but for me, I like it because it makes me recognize that I may not be able to solve all of this in the moment, but what's one baby step I can take towards, even if it's not a solution, maybe it's something that will help me be more resilient to create this. So going for a walk, or what is that one baby step you can take right now, and sort of just reframe from focusing so much on the problem to starting to redirect towards a potential solution. But I'm going to stop talking so that you can get through the steps.
Okay. We will go on to the next step. So step 5 we just did, and thank you for all your comments. They're awesome. Step 6 is identify a balanced and fair-minded thought. Identify. So find balanced and fair-minded thoughts, emotional responses, and self-talk that you might apply to this situation. This is where mindfulness, this is where gratitude comes in. This is where you're able to see things broader than what it was. And I'll share a defining moment in my life about gratitude. Both of my parents were sick for the last 10 years of their lives. They were very, very sick. I live in Toronto. They were in Ottawa. There was about 10 years ago, I was in Ottawa on business and I was staying with them. And one morning I get up, and before I go to work, I go in to say good morning to them. My mother's awake, but my father is still sleeping. As I'm talking to my mother, my father wakes up and he turns over and he looks at her with this beautiful smile on his face. And he says, oh, I got another day. And while that broke my heart at that moment, it completely changed my paradigm, because he wasn't even teaching me a life lesson at that moment. What I realized in that moment is that with everything that he was dealing with, he found something to be grateful for. He was grateful that he had another day with my mother. And from that moment on, every morning I wake up and I look for something to be grateful for. And every night before I go to bed, I think of something that I'm grateful for, because there's always something. So take a second now and write one thing that you are grateful for in the chat.
And I'm also grateful for all the comments coming through. I am reading them. So thank you for your feedback.
I love all of it. Yes.
Yeah. People are commenting on their health, their family, their children, their dogs, their friendships.
Absolutely. All of that. And you have all of that. So even when things are difficult, and what I can share with you is that my family was hit very hard by COVID. We lost 3 family members. We've had people who've lost their jobs. And as a family unit, we have found things to be grateful for. We meet every month and we have a cousins call. We talk about all sorts of things. Even though all of this is going on around us, we always end up with something that we're grateful for. And in those cases, we're grateful that we have each other. So there's always something to be grateful for.
And people are grateful for your story, and also sharing condolences for your loss.
Thank you.
So, and a lot of positive comments in terms of people being, grateful for so many things in their life. So we're seeing your messages. So thank you for sharing with us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And step 7 is the final one. And again, just reiterating, writing it down. So what we suggest here is write down your new self-talk. Okay. How are you going to see the situation? Because remember, we got rid of that negative voice. So what's the new voice going to say to you that allows you to be objective so that you can be more resilient? You can be more optimistic. And I'm going to give you something to think about. And I believe this very strongly. If you can see it, you can measure it. So when I write it down, I can see it. I can see the magnitude, or I can see that I might be making it into something bigger than it is. So if you can see it, you can measure it. If you can measure it, you can manage it. And if you can manage it, you can control it. And the one thing that we all have control over is our thoughts and what we and our actions. So the key to resilience is being aware of how you're looking at the situation in that moment and being able to reframe it in a way that allows you to move forward. So there you go. Write down one new self-talk in the participants chat.
One phrase that was shared with me the other day that I find powerful is they say, although, so you fill in like, so although I am stressed in this moment, for example, what is also true is that I know I'm a good mom, and I know I'm doing the best that I can, and I know that we will get through this, so it's like,
Love it.
Although this is happening, this is also true. So you're not negating the situation. And our words are powerful. So we need to really be careful about to your point, what that we allow that voice to say. So folks are saying, I am strong. I'm hopeful we will get through this. It might be a bad day, but it's not a bad life. Today is one of many. Let's keep that in perspective. You can handle this. I forgive myself. Forgiveness is now becoming a new term that we haven't used a lot in the past in the corporate arena, but people are being required to forgive ourselves and forgive others. To have an emotional pass. This too shall pass. This is fabulous. Yeah, and
awesome.
I'll just mention that as shortly we'll be going into the question and answer portion of today. And there are way more questions than what we can answer, but Marilyn has been gracious to stay a few minutes to go beyond. So for those of you who do have to log off at noon, that's fine. You'll get a copy of this recording if you want to see the Q&A, because we might go a little bit past time.
And I'm loving everything you're putting there. That's awesome, everybody. There's another pat for us. Okay, and just to sum it all up, I'm going to give you a new mantra and repeat it after me. Okay, you ready? To achieve greater resilience, we will. What are we going to do?
Greater resilience, we will.
We will adopt a growth mindset.
Adopt a growth mindset.
become aware of our self-talk and acknowledge our emotions.
I will become aware of my self-talk and acknowledge my emotions.
And I'm going to reframe my negative thoughts into solutions or opportunities.
You didn't make this easy, but I commit to reframing my negative thoughts and thinking of solutions or opportunities.
Awesome. All right. And now we're going to open it up to your questions.
Yes. So thank you, everyone. If you put a question again in the chat panel, I'm just going to take over here of the presentation. Please move it over to the Q&A panel so that we can more easily see what those are. And we have so many. So I'm just going to take a look here. One question that came up was a woman who's saying that she has a growth mindset, but she's working with, and I don't know if it's managing or just working with as colleagues, with a lot of people who have a very fixed mindset or seem very judgmental. Do you have any suggestions for her, Marilyn?
That's where my how do you know comes in. So as the step 4 in our 7-step process is for us, that's the first question. Whenever I'm in a situation like that and somebody says it's not going to work, I'll say to them, how do you know? And then it's a conversation starter, and then you can redirect it from there. And again, not why do you not like it? How do you know it's not going to work? What happened? What do you think we need to look at so that it doesn't happen again? What roadblocks do you potentially see that might prevent us from achieving that? So it's about reframing it. So it's okay to have a fixed mindset. Some of us are just wired that way. But if we ourselves have a growth mindset, we can ask the right questions that can expand their thinking.
Yeah, I love that. Sorry, I just went back a screen. It wasn't the magic mouse. Someone asked me to actually go back so they could see that again. I can leave this on the mantra slide. Now, the example that I gave with my daughter, you know, in the scheme of life, very simple thing, but there's a question from someone who's saying, you know, how do you maintain resilience when you have multiple traumatic events happening simultaneously, a move, a breakup, COVID, isolation, death, sickness? And I'm guessing this has something to do with self-care, but I will let you comment further.
In the moment, having lived that life myself, it's very hard to do. And what worked for me is just to find one thing that you can do something about, and surround yourself by other people who can fill in those gaps, because you can't be everywhere at the same time. But if there's one place where you could be at this moment, where is the one place that you could add the most value? And then find others who can fill in the other ones, because all of that is actually happening in 100%. And it does seem overwhelming, but there is one piece of it that you can do something about at this moment. There's many other people. I'll share this, although I've shared personal stories, I'll share this one with you. I had gone through a situation like that, everything you just described, and that was my life in 2000. And up until that time, I was hesitant to ask other people for help because I was the one that everybody all came to. And there was one situation where I actually did ask, and it happened to be my sister. And she cried and she said to me, "Thank you, Marilyn, for letting me in." She says, "I've been wanting to help you through all of this, but you tend to be so strong and hold on to all of it yourself. Thank you for letting me in." And that was like a big aha moment to me. And from that moment on, I realized by my taking all of it on myself, I'm not giving other people an opportunity to make a difference for me. And they want to, because I make a difference for them. But I'm also not giving myself the flexibility to do all the things that need to be done, because I can't be everywhere at the same time. So ask for help. It's there.
That's beautiful. There's a lot in what you said, because, you know, one of the teachers that I follow says, you know, sometimes when things are difficult for you, one of the best ways to get out of it is turn around and help someone else. So to your point, allowing someone to have the gift to reciprocate is huge. I'll add one other thing that I found has worked really well for me. I have long known all the good things to be doing to engage in self-care, but it wasn't until COVID hit that I really had to cement in one practice. So every morning without fail, I meditate. Now, meditation isn't necessarily for everyone. Some people might be going for a run. It might be whatever your thing is. I had meditated on and off for probably 20 years, but I can tell you it is the single most important thing that I do every day. So I say, I think it's really important to have an anchor. So whether that's a conversation with somebody every morning to start your day off, whether it's whatever it is that you need to do, find that one thing, even if it's small, and consistency is more important than anything else. So I'll offer that up.
Agreed. Great.
So let's see. I'm just scanning through. So one of the questions was, we talked about folks not being able to operate at their usual capacity, but how do you do that in an environment where you've taken on, say, 3 jobs, there's been layoffs, and those jobs that you've taken on are different than what you were doing. So you're really feeling stretched. I'm guessing this has partly to do with what we shared around redefining what's possible.
That's where my mind was going with it. Or take each different job as a time in and of itself, as opposed to looking at it as a whole, looking at them as each one is a separate thing. I'm doing the best I can here and now. Okay, I can't do anything about those things now because I'm here. Then the next one you go into, I'm doing the best I can here and now because I can't really do those things. And then same for the other situation. Ask your family for help. If you have young kids, let them set the table, let them make the salad, let them do things. What I find in a lot of the coaching I'm doing is that we're trying to take on everything and we're not teaching others around us how to do things for themselves because we're doing all of it and they love it. If you've got young kids and you're doing everything, they're home. Let them learn life skills about the house. Let them make the dinner. Let them take out the garbage. Whatever it is, you don't have to be everything to everybody. There's a lot of people who would like to be something for you.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think you've probably answered a few questions because there are sort of some similar themes coming through in terms of how do you manage other people's expectations. So this person is sharing, that her daughter's teacher has requested that they go out and do all these things and buy all these things, and they're getting all this communication from the school. In the meantime, they're getting all these, requests from their work. So we just have to have, I think, really honest conversations about what's possible. I know in my own life, I've had to let some things go and it's been really sad. I'm, in my own group, I participate in Toastmasters, for example, and our meeting participation's been dwindling and I haven't been able to show up religiously as I have in the past. It's just, I don't have it in me and something has got to go. And it's sad for me to make that choice, but I think sometimes we really need to get really honest with ourselves and really others to say, I know I've done this in the past. I don't have capacity to do this. And then, that's where the self-forgiveness and I think the honesty and self-compassion maybe comes into play.
Agreed. And having conversations with your daughter and saying to her, here's what it's all looking like. Let's take a look at what we can really realistically do. Okay. So they might want us to do all of this, but realistically, we can do this really well. So is it about doing it all or is it about doing some of it really well? And that'll be the decision that you'll make together. Same thing with your boss. You might want all of this done. I can do all of it and it'll look like this, or I can do these things really, really well. And that's part of managing that expectation. It's been my observation that when I ask you to do something as a manager to a staff person, I don't remember it after I've told you. So as I think it, I'm telling you something else. You, as the staff person, have a plate that is continually being filled, but they have no idea what's on that plate. So there's an opportunity for you to clarify, well, here's all the stuff I'm working on now. Where does that fit in? And what you may find, and what I found in those conversations is, oh my gosh, we're not even doing that anymore. But as the manager, I wouldn't have even thought to go back and tell them because I didn't even remember that they were doing it.
And it's funny, I think a lot of us can be guilty of running around trying to meet expectations because of what we've been doing in the past, whether we're a leader or an employee, but not necessarily taking the time to actually hey, let's talk about what is still required, what still adds value, and what can we remove? Because we're all trying to show up looking good and maintaining the norm. But, we've got Zoom fatigue. We don't have time to go to the bathroom between meetings. We're, doing all this. Someone was here talking about the question is their personal and professional lives have collided and they don't have any safe space or sanctuary, to kind of to regroup. So, whether that's in the work environment, meeting with your team and saying, okay, how do we create this space for one another? Does it mean 45-minute meetings instead of 60? So we all get 15 minutes of, whatever. What does that look like, in your home lives and is it in your work lives? And let's rethink. Let's go back to that growth mindset and curiosity. This is a really time to say, like, just because it's always been this way, does it need to be this way? What can we let go of? What work can we do that we do 20% and get 80% of the results? So I think this is part of the conversation.
But you came up with a very important strategy. Just because it's always been that way doesn't mean that that's going to work now. That's
Right.
part of the resilience, is taking a step back and saying, you know what, just because it always worked, but we're not doing it in this environment. We're not doing it with those people. We're not doing it with so let's take a look at what we can realistically do in the world that we're currently living in.
Yeah, absolutely. One woman here is saying that all this sounds good, but how do you do this when you have young children, you're working, you're worried, your kids are acting out because they're worried, feeling isolated. So your parent, employee, wife, husband, etc., you're feeling, like things are spinning out of control. One thing that I will offer, and it's certainly not easy, but I have observed it with my own daughter, is that she is often a reflection of my internal world. So on the one hand, that might sound like a lot of pressure that I need to get it together, but I think it's really important that whatever that sanctuary is, whatever that is that's going to ground you, is going to be so helpful. It's not always about what you say and do, but it's like your energy. They feed off, I think, our energy as parents. So that putting on your oxygen mask first and really making sure to find time for yourself. It is not selfish. It is essential. I don't know if you would ask, add something and how to deal with that worry and overwhelm. You've already given quite a few strategies, actually.
I would say when my son was younger, he's actually going to be 24 next week, but when he was younger, I sat down with him when we, in the middle of all that crisis. He was 3.5 years old at that time. And I said to him, you know what, there are going to be times, and if mommy says this to you, or if I ask you for that, and it might sound like a very adult conversation, but our kids are instinctively more resilient than we are. And as Tanya said, they pick up their energy from us. So we're modeling that for them, and keep that in mind. But talk to them. If your child is having a meltdown, just sit down and say, you know what, honey, I just need a hug right now. And it shifts their thinking at the same time. Keep the choices that we have, that we're giving people, keep them realistic. Well, what do you want? Well, I want a pony. Well, the pony's not on the table. You can have the cookie, or you can have the ice cream cone. There's still a choice. So even though for us it's so much simpler to just go broad strokes, if you bring it down into more manageable chunks, you'll find that everything will fall into more manageable chunks, even though you've got all those wheels spinning and all those balls in the air. But just manage it in that way.
Yeah, I didn't mean to laugh, but when you said pony, I managed to get my daughter from a dog down to a hamster. It was originally a fish, so we negotiated up to a hamster, and it's actually been really great for her to have a pet. I wasn't ready to take on one more thing like a dog, as beautiful as dogs are. So the hamster was, a short-term compromise. There's a question here about dealing with isolation, especially as the winter months are coming for folks, especially who live alone, and how to maintain mental health. I was reading the other day that according to this one study, that the single most important defining criteria for resilience, actually, it was unconditional relationships. And I think that gets to your point about having someone to reach out to. But I was also thinking in the corporate arena, I know for us, we use MS Teams for example, and some days I simply just make a point of, messaging someone and like, how is your day going? And just really having that authentic connection, not related to work, and being able to sometimes vent and share, but just knowing someone is sort of on the same page. There's someone who may be experiencing the same thing as you. I think it's really important right now, as we won't be able to easily meet outside. So what else can we do in that mental health arena to not feel so isolated, so that we can be more focused and productive?
100%, 100%. I've had the gift of working with military veterans who suffer from PTSD. And that's actually one of the things that we do, is that we actually have a chat that's open 24 hours a day, and there's always somebody on there. So if anybody wants to talk about anything, and they're going through some very, very difficult times, there's always somebody that's there to chat with them. So that we did that before we had all of this, because I've been doing that for years. So Tanya, your idea of having someone to talk to, having a forum. Another suggestion I'm going to make is, if you're feeling isolated, call, I don't know, you could call whatever your place of worship is, and find out if they have members who are isolated, who need a check-in phone call, just to call somebody to see how you're doing. At the beginning of COVID, I had a list of 30 people that I would call every month. They were many different ages, but they were the vulnerable is really how they called them. And I would just check in on them, and they looked forward to those calls. And you know what? I look forward to those calls too. So even though you may feel isolated, you don't have to be isolated. There's any number of ways that you can find touch points.
Yeah, and I would add, if you can add humor to it. I'm not here to advocate any particular app or program, but my family has adopted the app Marco Polo. And since COVID has started, especially since my parents, I work for the Canadian Management Center. I'm physically located in the US and haven't been able to get to see my parents during this whole time. And we make a point of all family. I've got a sister in Norway, and we're all dispersed. Every day we do something really funny, and some days I really don't feel like it, but we sort of but as soon as I see my sister do something funny, and then and we build off each other. And I think these little micro moments have been a lifesaver. It's something to look forward to, something to shift the energy. I think we just have to be really creative as to what we can come up with. I think we'll take maybe one more question. I'm mindful of the time. There's so many to choose from. Someone is asking, with your work, if you're consistently falling behind and playing catch up, how do you calm your reaction to that, I guess, in order to stay focused? So I think we've actually you've shared quite a few tools in terms of reframing. I think we've talked about resetting expectations. Maybe you want to repeat some of the things we've already shared, because I'm thinking that there's quite a bit that you've put out there for folks.
Actually, what I'm thinking is actually something a little different. In situations like that, I tend to ask myself, if I could only do one thing at this moment, what's the one thing that will have the biggest impact? That way, I don't ever have to go back and say why I chose one thing, because at that moment, I had all the information I needed to do this. Because when you think about all the stuff that you have on your plate, there's a lot of things you're still waiting for information on. And as long as you are looking at it, it's bothering you. And I'm actually looking at what I have over here on my desk, in case you're wondering what I'm doing with that. So what you do is you say, okay, at this moment, I might have all this stuff, but if I could only do one thing right now, what's the one thing that I could do that would have the biggest impact? And that's what I do. And that takes the guilt off me. If something new happens while I'm working on that becomes something else that gets added on, I'll ask that same question. At this moment, if I could only do one thing from the one that's just been brought in and the one I was working on, which one is the higher value add? And that's what I would do. And that way you're always on top of the game, because you're only ever working on the stuff that matters. Because there's a lot of stuff that doesn't matter. It comes down to prioritizing. The difference between time management and priority management is time management is getting stuff done. Priority management is getting the right stuff done. Okay.
And I'll just build on that, because I love that. I think those of you on the line who have been talking about dealing with employees, I think if not only doing this for yourself, but this is probably the biggest gift right now for employees, helping them, asking them, what is the one thing? What is the one thing, today, this week, this month, whatever the time period is, helping people focus? Because as we know, when our brains are hijacked, when that amygdala goes crazy, because we're just thinking, it's really hard to prioritize. Everything seems like a burning platform. So asking people, what is the one thing? And, what can I do to support you, or what can you do to support yourself? Who can you reach out to? A lot of people are saying, they can't be all things. So helping people figure out how they can do that for themselves. I think this is really great. We obviously, we've had way more questions than the time we have to answer all of this.
Tanya, I just want to share one thing before you wrap it up.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, I'm going to read you something that was sent to me. So even though you go through tough times and you think that sometimes you're alone, I'm going to share, it's from Winnie the Pooh, and that'll be my close. So if you were wondering what I was doing, I was actually looking for it. Today was a difficult day, said Pooh. There was a pause. Do you want to talk about it? Asked Piglet. No, said Pooh after a bit. No, I don't think so. That's okay, said Piglet, and he came and sat beside his friend. What are you doing? Asked Pooh. Nothing really, said Piglet. Only I know what difficult days are like, and quite often I don't feel like talking about it on my difficult days either. But goodness, continued Piglet, difficult days are so much easier when you know you've got someone there for you. And I'll always be here for you, Pooh. And as Pooh sat there working through in his head his difficult day, while the solid, reliable Piglet sat next to him quietly, swinging his little legs, he thought that his best friend had never been more right. You're not alone.
That's a beautiful close. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to just mention for those of you who are getting value from this, this conversation about resilience is part of a bigger conversation about emotional intelligence. If you yourself or people on your team would like to learn more skills around emotional self-regulation, self-awareness, all these things that we are talking about that we obviously can't do a deep dive in the course of 60 minutes, we do have programs that are available that we're running virtually right now, and it's even more interactive than what we're doing here in our virtual sessions. You have breakout groups, you can make friends and make contacts and have a really meaningful experience. And Marilyn is one of many wonderful facilitators that we have that deliver these programs. Also, because we can't answer everything, we do on our website have additional resources for you related to this topic, but also leading virtually and some other relevant topics that have come up through the chat panel and the Q&A. So please visit us at cmcoutperform.com, check out our free resources, and hopefully you can find something there that can be of further assistance to you. With that, I want to sincerely thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for the way that you show up. Thank you for all the insights, the authenticity in your stories. I can tell from the comments in the chat panel that are coming through now that people got a lot of value from that. So thank you. And I want to thank all of our participants for showing up and taking this time and being with us. And we really look forward to seeing you again in a future webcast session. Thank you.
Stay safe and be well, everyone.